好，现在是7点整，我们准时开始今晚美国弗吉尼亚大学新谈项目 Leader for Tomorrow 公益讲座系列的第5场，也是我们今年新谈项目系列讲座的最后一场压轴好戏。各位老师，大家好，很荣幸能够担任今天的主持，我是高燕。So I'm Dr. Yan Gao. In the next slide, will be introduce myself. So 我是我们新谈项目的技术支持。目前呢，在 Henrico County Public School 呢担任中文老师已经13年了。感谢大家在百忙之中来参加我们的讲座。我们今天的特邀嘉宾是 Dr. Kathryn Murphy-Judy。在讲座之前，我们要请我们的新谈项目主任，也是我们弗吉尼亚大学世界语言中心的主任Dr. 妙芬曾教授来做欢迎致辞。曾老师也是 Daniel's Family NEH 的杰出教授。好，曾老师有请。
Thanks to Yan Gao for the brief opening remark. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. 早上好，下午好，晚上好，大家好。Welcome to attend the 5th and the last talk of the online outreach series organized by the Institute of World Languages and the Chinese Language Program at the University of Virginia. 竭诚欢迎各位参加弗吉尼亚大学真实任务化教学公益讲座系列的第5场。在此之前呢，我们的初中组、高中组跟大学组的老师都做完报告了。那么他们的视频在我们的新谈项目的网站都可以看到回放，那么也可以看得到教学所使用的 PPT， 大家都可以免费下载。福大的新谈项目从2008年开始至今，不断创新，接受挑战，于2016年转型成功，成为全国网络中文教学的领头羊。我们的优秀教师在全美各地不断崭露头角，起了一定程度的示范与领导作用。那么在过去多年努力的基础上，我们的项目呢，目前又开创了一个新模式，增加了秋季实地课堂教学的环节，我们继续优化强化。那么今天这一场讲座，我们特别安排一个压轴好戏，是由 Dr. Kathryn Murphy-Judy 针对目前外语教学最关心的 social justice 社会正义这个主题，结合科技教育的工具在外语上的这个应用，为我们带来相当精彩前卫的内容。接下来我们把时间交给介绍人，由高燕老师 Dr. Yan Gao will introduce our keynote speaker today.OK，
非常感谢曾老师的精彩欢迎致辞。现在我来介绍一下我们今天的特邀嘉宾 Dr. Kathryn Murphy-Judy。他是一位法语教授，目前担任 VCU 大学的名誉教授，同时也是该校杰出的职业教授。今天我们讲座除了前面这部分我们有中文介绍，后面报告全部都会是英文的。如果各位老师有任何问题，同样请在 Zoom Chat Box 当中用英文来提问，或者等报告结束之后呢，打开您的麦克风直接提问。Dr. Kathryn Murphy-Judy 一直有效地将科技工具应用到语言教学当中，并且在这个领域呢，拥有着丰富的经验和卓越的成果，在世界语言教育领域做出了颇多的贡献，起到了模范带头的作用，并且他也是我们弗吉尼亚外语教师协会 FLAWA 的前任主席和现任财务主管。同时呢，他也是我们Calico 就是计算机辅助语言教学国际组织的秘书。同时Dr. Kathryn Murphy-Judy 也在美国外语教师协会就是 ACFO 的远程学习兴趣小组做过前任主席。他在语言教学领域的领导地位和卓越贡献是有目共睹的，因此他也是我们这个领域的一个杰出代表。我们今天非常荣幸能够请到 Dr. Kathryn Murphy-Judy 来给我们做这个报告。老师们可以看到 Dr. Kathryn 呢写了一本非常实用的备受赞誉的一个线上教学的书，叫 Teaching Language Online， 为我们线上教学提供了许多宝贵的指导和建议。那现在呢，我们就请大家热烈欢迎 Dr. Murphy-Judy 来给我们分享他的专业见解，以及在线语言教学的前沿领域当中的探索和研究。好的 ，Now let's welcome Dr. Kathryn Murphy-Judy to share your professional suggestions.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Gao, and the Institute. I am so pleased to be here, and I would like to thank all of the participants and attendees. This was what I had proposed to be talking about, the leadership at the crux of social justice and instructional technology. And so without going into that, I would like to look at what we will be looking at today. So the introduction, I would like to say that we are at a period of volatility and change, not only in world language education, but also just in general social, political, and global terms. There have been three critical issues that have touched us in the past 5 years and that promise to keep having significant, profound, and ongoing impact on our lives as world language professors and teachers, as people who teach languages and cultures in whichever country that we do, whether we do it as a first language or a second language. We are really in a very important time for us as educators, but also for us as members of the world community. So the frame of today's talk is leadership. We're going to be looking at ourselves as leaders and what that means as teachers and as professionals in the teaching of Chinese and other languages. But within that framework of leadership, we're going to be looking at these momentous occurrences that have come through social justice, COVID and the pandemic, and most recently, artificial intelligence. On each one of these topics, we will look at the topic, and then we'll have a chance to talk about it. And after we've had a discussion, mostly over in the Zoom chat, I will also give you links and ways to delve further into these issues on your own after subsequent to this talk. So the frame that we have is that of leadership. And our question is, where are we as leaders? And how and where and why should we take the lead? And this might be in our own classrooms, where definitely we are leaders, we are the teachers, we create the class, we create the curriculum, we execute the work that the students are going to do. But we're not just managing a classroom, we're leaders. And so I would like to look up at the very top. A man named Drucker in 1974 made a difference between leaders and managers. And he said, leaders do the right thing. Managers do things right. Managers do things in the correct and appropriate fashion. Cotter, another business thinker in 1990, said that managers cope with complexity. And we do that in our classrooms, we do that in our professions. But leaders, and that's who we are eventually, leaders cope with change. And as I've mentioned, we've had three extremely important changes that are going to continue impacting us. And we will talk about those within the frame of how we can be leaders. We already know that we're leaders in our classroom. We're also leaders within our schools. We are leaders within the language field. So in Chinese, you all have been going through this institute, participate in these kind of workshops and conversations because you are leaders in the field of Chinese language and culture education. We are also leaders in the larger world language profession, Chinese and other languages. But we are also leaders, hopefully, for advocating for the teaching and learning of languages, as well as for intercultural competency in our communities, whether they are in the country and the area in which we teach, or if it's also in our home native lands. But we need constantly to be leaders in letting other leaders know, political leaders, educational leaders, that what we are doing as language and cultural educators is quintessential to the 21st century. It is the sine qua non. It is what has to be in education for any young person who is going to live and work and get along in the 21st century. We are as important as mathematics, as STEM and engineering, as knowing history. The ability to be able to communicate in more than one language is a fundamental literacy for the 21st century. In what follows then, we're going to be considering together where and how leadership, your leadership, is essential in today's educational and societal landscape, because we are in a constant, accelerating, and inevitable world of change. We're going to have our first chat now. So you know that there is a little spot on your Zoom that says chat. If you would click on that, it's going to, there are already some messages there, so you can get at this talk. And I'm going to type a message, which is just hi to everyone. And that's over in the chat. I hope you have it open. But what we're going to be doing in the chat area is there is a specialist in technology enhanced language learning called Heyo Reinders. And he has asked us that we consider someone who has had a great influence on our careers, someone that we would describe as a leader. Can you think of someone who is like that? And someone who has inspired you, someone, maybe a public figure, maybe somebody who's right next door to you. And once you've thought of that person, you don't need to write their name, but list attributes, list the reasons why you think that person is your example of a leader. So maybe that person is very understanding, or the person is very supportive, or the person is an expert in their field. Maybe it's someone who's consistent. What are the qualities? What are the attributes? Write 1, 2, 3, 4, even 5 of these attributes, these qualities of this person that you thought of, that you visualized, and just go ahead and write them in the chat. We're going to kind of take a look at how we, as a community of professionals, how we see the important attributes that a leader in our field has. So I'm going to do it too. Please go over in the chat and just start writing. Oh, look, I'm seeing some wonderful things. Yeah. Forward thinking and a visionary, thoughtful, understanding, someone who's able to bring the best out in a whole group. That's definitely a leader. Encouraging, positive, a person who is just, enthusiastic, a person who helps, a person who cares, a person who has an open mindset, support, passionate, yes, knowledgeable, definitely. Somebody who listens. These are great. Somebody who cares about feelings. A cheerleader. Rah, rah, rah. Yay, you. Go, you. Excellent. Excellent. Someone who's transparent. I love that. Who takes charge, but listens and delegates. Wonderful. Creative, positive. These are just wonderful. Yes, passionate about the field. Excellent. Excellent. All right, maybe let's see if I've kind of looked at empathetic. Yes, that is very important and encouraging. Yes, all righty. Those are wonderful. Go ahead and keep putting some more in, and we're going to move on now. And we're going to take a look at some world language leadership resources and readings. And these are going to be available to you. You already have the QR code on the very first slide of this presentation. So you can get to a PowerPoint that has all of these links. And all of these are links that you're seeing here. So there are a number of books and articles that I've put here for you. And there are some programs like the Leadership Initiative for Language Learning, which is run through ACTFL and a number of US American associations. There's NADSFL, which is the National Association of District Supervisors for Foreign Languages. There is a whole center at Culture in Georgia, the National Museum of Language, but also there are associations, for example, Start Talk, which you all know, and of course, this fantastic Chinese Teacher Academy at the University of Virginia that is hosting us this evening. And the Chinese Language Teachers Association. There are any number, depending on where you are in the world. In the United States, each one of the states has got a foreign language association, like the Foreign Language Association of Virginia. There are regional ones like the Northeast Conference on the Teaching of Foreign Languages, a national one like the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages. There are ones that are specific to what we've been working on for the past few years, which is technology and language instruction. So there's Calico, the Computer Assisted Language Instruction, IALT, the International Association. There's also the American Association of Applied Linguistics, Asia Call, World Call, and any number of other associations. But I just thought I'd give you a few to take a look at and maybe poke around in. Some of these, like LIL, every year has a program, and it is funded in part through your school, but also in part through ACTFL. And so there is funding for professionals like you to get leadership training. So that's our frame, is the leadership. Now we're going to start taking a look at how we can apply our ways of thinking about being a leader with some of the really important movements that have happened recently in not just world languages, but also throughout the world, because these have been some globally impactful things that have taken place and that have already touched our lives as teachers, but also will continue to touch our lives for the foreseeable future. So social justice has been a very important topic in world languages, but also in the United Nations, in UNESCO, in the European Union, in any number of areas, the notion that we need to have diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion has become a paramount issue in education. Now, social justice in technology-enhanced language learning looks at the theory and the practice of inclusivity, diversity, equity, and access. But we need to take a look at what each one of these means. In technology-enhanced language learning, when we talk about diversity, usually we're talking about what entails the design and the building for student populations that have various what are called intersectionalities. That is, their identities that go beyond simply who they are gender-wise or racially or their ethnicity, but it combines a number of factors like race, ethnicity, country of origin, one's sex, sexuality, one's ability, for example, if one has limitations to their ableness. Age is one of those intersectional factors. Religions can play into it. Also, whether the learner is homebound or if the learner is someone who can study on campus. It might be the learner's immigration status. There are a number of intersecting threads that define and make diverse our students. And it's important for us to attend to those as best we can. The tenets of the Universal Design for Learning, UDL, help us as educators respond to diverse populations and their various kinds of learning needs, so that we can help them be the best learner that they can be. Recently, our field has begun to pay attention to the notion of multilingual diversity in the language classroom. Our students are tending nowadays not to just be monolingual, having the home language of their country, but we have so many recent immigrants, we have so many heritage speakers, we have so many different languages and cultures and just ways of being that are coming together in our classrooms, so that we are looking more and more at not just teaching for a language, for example, Chinese, but teaching Chinese to people who may be native speakers of English or Spanish or Italian or Afrikaans, any number. Teaching for equity. Now, equity should not be confused with equality. Equity means that we are using our teaching practice to disrupt inequities, imbalances, those things that hamper students' experiences and outcomes. So equity is to disrupt inequities, to transform students' experiences and outcomes, and create a more just and joyful world. We must not only be aware of identity and complex needs, but also be experts in our content. And that is a quote that I've taken from Leading Educators in 2020. In technology-enhanced language learning, it means that the instructor, that we, or the instructional designer, that we recognize that not all learners are equal in terms of their background, their ability, the time that they have to give to the learning that we are offering them. They're not all the same in the resources that they have, in their learning environment. But we also recognize that our learners need different learning outcomes and different pathways, something that we call differentiation, so that they can realize the outcomes in an equitable fashion that takes their differences into account, that each one of them, with all of their differences, is valued equally, and that all of these differences and the wealth that is the complexity and the intersectionalities of our wonderful students is reckoned for. Accessibility, has a double meaning. There is access to technology and connectivity, and this is also often spoken about as the digital divide, where there are some students who have the hardware and the software and the internet connections, and the students who are have-nots. They don't have the access. Some of these issues are due to affordability. Some students don't have the money. Elsewhere, there is the notion of access, where it's with respect to whether students have a disability or are challenged to be able to be in a classroom and to access the education at the same level with all of the other students, regardless of their ability. Now, when it comes to this second kind of access, very frequently that has legal ramifications and is particularly important in the kindergarten through high school levels, and very often is determined at a national level by national laws and policies. It has come to include a more comprehensive notion that may lay outside legal disability rights and accommodations in technology-enhanced language learning. In our field, very frequently, the discussion is more about accessibility in light of, do the students have access to computers, software, hardware, and the internet? So UNICEF, in talking about the kindergarten through 12th grade arena, they call accessible education that which, quote, gives all children a fair chance to go to school, learn, and develop the skills they need to thrive, with all children in the same classrooms, in the same schools, and having real learning opportunities for groups who have traditionally been excluded, not only children with disabilities, but speakers of minority languages too. At the post-secondary level, which is where I've been teaching my past 50 years, the emphasis on accessibility and inclusion has everything to do with recruiting, admitting, supporting, and retaining diverse student populations by ensuring a safe and nurturing campus environment and supportive learning practices. And the US Department of Education, the European Commission, all have this notion of inclusion, which is the fourth one. Sometimes, however, inclusivity is seen as the umbrella for all types of social justice, for diversity, equity, accessibility, and the inclusiveness. So those are our definitions. But now we're going to take a look at how social justice has been affecting us in world languages recently, and will undoubtedly continue to affect us. First of all, there have been social changes and social change and changes in notions of what student identities are. And I think we all have heard of George Floyd and his death. And also the Black Lives Matter movement, which touched, yes, obviously the United States to a great extent, but I know as a French professor and a professor who works quite a bit with West Africa, that George Floyd and Black Lives Matter had resonated throughout Europe and Africa. I know that when I used to teach a course in social media, that things that happen in the US very often reverberate elsewhere in the world, and definitely Black Lives Matter and people's lives matter. It was very, very important. There was also the Me Too, that hashtag Me Too movement that is about women being treated in a fair, equitable way, women not being harassed, discriminated against. That too seems to have been not entirely a global phenomenon, but it too reverberated across many parts of the world. There also have been quite a few incidences and discussions of LGBTIQ, so the lesbian, bisexual, gay, transgender, and I always forget what the I and Q are, but the different kinds of gender and sexuality instances are also currently and continue to be very important. There are countries where a person can die because they are lesbian or gay or transgender. There are also, for our students and for many of our faculty, it is very important to look at what has been called BIPOC, the Black, Indigenous, people of color. And in the United States, I'm sure any number of you who are of Asian descent recognize that there are biases and there have been many kinds of discriminations against you in this country. And we're going to come back to that when we look at COVID, because the point in fact is right there. So these are all issues that are extremely important to our students. And we as instructors, whether personally we think they're important or not, we do have to take them into consideration because we are teaching a population of young people for whom these issues and things that have happened, Black Lives Matter, the Me Too movement, LGBTIQ issues, being a student who is BIPOC, it is all extremely important. Many of these things affect us personally as teachers and just in our own lives. So the second issue is and has been COVID, which we all know. We went through the pandemic. And I will have a link to it. I was asked to be the editor or a special series editor for a special issue on the effects of COVID on language and international studies, teaching and learning. And what I found through the other issues, the other chapters that were written, that very frequently, and I'm sure I don't need to tell you this, that in the United States and in some other countries, there was a notion, there was misinformation, disinformation that was pushed out over and over again in the media that somehow COVID, that the whole pandemic came from China and it was China's fault and it was connected to Chinese people. And it was horrendous. It was an instance of social injustice against people of Asian descent. And when I read the other articles, I found out that not only I knew this was happening in the United States and saw it as a travesty, but I learned from my colleagues that it was also in the media of many other countries, and that this war of disinformation about COVID and China was rampant. So issues of social justice very much are implicated in COVID, but also COVID had a huge impact on us just as teachers, because we had the lockdown and we suddenly found ourselves having to teach online, whether it was Chinese or any other language, whatever was being taught online. And there were many, many teachers who were not ready for that. Fortunately, those of you who are here are interested in technologies and language learning. And so you undoubtedly were already a little bit ahead of the game and able to pivot, as the word was used, into becoming an online teacher. Number 3, world languages are imperative as world language instructors, is that we teach tolerance, that we teach people who may know only the language of their home, a language from another country, from another people, from another area of the world that has different ways of being, thinking, acting, eating, sleeping in the world. We also, as world language educators, are very much involved in cultural and information literacy. Part of what we do is expose our students to the media that is out there worldwide, so that when there is disinformation being pumped out about COVID, that we can show them that this is not how everybody in the world sees this issue, that there are different ways to perceive things. There are different kinds of media that one can look at to be literate and globally literate. We also are working with learners to be critical thinkers, to not just say, oh, well, I read that on the internet, it must be true, but to say, but what does the Chinese press say? What does the Korean press say? What does the Italian press say? To be able to look, not just read the New York Times or Fox News, but to look as well at Al Jazeera. And part of what we're doing as world language educators is that we're helping our students learn that there are movements of social justice around the world. There are things happening at borders. There are wars. There are refugees. And we are the ones who are helping our students understand what this means to our students in their lives that are global. And as well, and I think we see this happening in the United States and in many other countries, there's a lot of censorship going on. Now, censorship and political concerns are a double-edged sword for us. If we are in states like Florida and like Mississippi and even perhaps in Virginia, we have to be careful about how we present information, even though we are trying to give a balanced view of the world as it is today, not from any one perspective, but a 360 global view of things that are going on, how people see the world. We still have to be very careful with that, that we do not get caught up in bipartisan, right, left, populist, democratic, all of these arguments. What we're trying to do is help our students see the world from a bigger perspective, from a larger horizon. So that being said, let us go back into the chat area. And if you at first would just say, who comes to your mind as a social justice leader or a champion in social justice? And this might be professionally or personally. And why is that person a leader in social justice in your eyes? If you would just type that up as quickly as you can, and we'll take a look at how we're thinking about it. I always think about Nelson Mandela. I just think he was And I think he was a champion because he attacked apartheid. So who do you see? Who is your champion? Can I please get you? Oh, yes, Martin Luther King. Excellent. Excellent. And don't be afraid to put in people from China whom I may not know, but who are very important. Jimmy Carter. Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Dolly. Anyone else? Oh, wonderful. R.F. Kuang. Michelle, I'm going to have to look at her work. R.F. Kuang, thank you. Oh, Dr. Sun Yat Xian. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that horribly. Gandhi. Oh, lovely. Thank you, Xizhang. And I'm trying really hard to remember the name of the journalist in the Philippines who has been imprisoned for quite a while. For some reason, I can't come up with her name right now. And there have been people environmentally who have been very important in social justice because the environment is a part of our social justice. Maybe Jacques Cousteau. Cousteau. Anyone else you can think of? Oh, okay. She was a parent of a student. Yes, it doesn't have to be a big person. The school PTO president. This is wonderful. You got to know each other at the PTO meeting and you became a good friend. She's the first Asian PTO president of our school. Yes, yes, that definitely is a social justice leader and champion. May not be at the big, media level, but that's somebody who's made a difference. Maybe it's one of your teachers. Maybe it's one of your colleagues. All righty. Well, keep thinking about it. If you come up with something as we move on, don't hesitate to put it in. So the second question that I have for you is how can language teachers exercise social justice in their classrooms, in their schools, and or off campus? How can a language teacher do social justice? So I think that we can just teach our students about what social justice looks like in other countries, because it's not all the same. There are ways of being socially just in China that are not the same as in the United States, and important differences. How do teachers, yes, celebrating different cultural festivals, exactly. Because isn't that important for, say, an American or a European kid of, who's from a certain background, from a European or North American background? I have to be careful here because we're so diverse wherever we live. But for them to think that New Year's happens on January 1st. Well, it sure doesn't happen on January 1st for probably most of the world. It happens on other days of the year. Yeah. Talking about language loss and all of the various dialects in Chinese language classrooms, very much so. I mean, Chinese is not a monolith. Most languages and cultures aren't. Have students recite MLK's speech in Chinese. Whoa, that would be wonderful for students to recognize that Martin Luther King's words can be uttered in Chinese, and they're doing it. That's fabulous. Additional materials so students can see themselves in the content. Yeah, so that students can see that people who look like them and talk like them, they can see themselves in China. They can see themselves, in the Chinese speaking world. International festivals to promote multicultures and multiple languages. I love that, Miao Fen. Thank you. Let's see. Those are some wonderful ideas. All right. Now, on the last two questions, we're just going to be quiet for a moment. If you'd like to answer them in the chat, you are welcome to, but do not feel that you have to. So I would like you to think and share, only if you want to, where do you see yourself as a real or potential leader, maybe a leader in the future, in social justice issues where you are right now? And also, what are the problems? What are the constraints? What are the impediments? What are the things that block you from being able to be the social justice warrior that you could be, or the things that you have already run into? I know that sometimes administrations don't like people who say, wait a minute, let's make sure that everybody's getting a fair share. Let's make sure every student is getting these opportunities. Let's make sure that our curriculum materials look like all of our students, not just like one group of students. So again, these two questions, you can answer one of them, both of them, but I'd like you to think about them. And if you feel like sharing, please do. But if you feel like you'd rather not, that's okay. There we go. Oh, yes. Miao Fen, perfect. The Institute of World Languages is advocating open pedagogy, open educational resources in many languages. Yes, OER, open educational resources, are definitely being a social justice leader. So if you're creating work and you're sharing it with the world openly, then you are definitely a social justice leader. Thank you. Thank you. And of course, one of the impediments that we find is that sometimes it's hard to use OER materials, open educational materials, because there is a very large classroom material production industry And many times we are expected to use materials that cost a great deal of money, even though we'd rather have our students being able to use materials that are free. Okay. Well, that question is just a little bit harder to deal with. So just keep thinking about it. If you feel like answering, if suddenly you go, oh gosh, I thought of this, please jump in and put your answer into the chat at any point of time to any of these. Oh, yes, Michelle. So you're amazed by how younger AA generation is much braver than we were. They are very brave. Our students are not afraid to get out there and say, no, that is wrong. We don't accept it. I see students coming out and talking to the president of our university and saying, no, no, no. It's really something to see them. And yes, I think a lot of us have been taught to keep our heads down and not make waves, but Asian American students, gosh, if it weren't for Asian American students standing up, I remember there was some proposition in California years ago where the legislature said, we are no longer going to have any sort of earmarks or anything. We're going to allow students into the universities, the University of California system, based on their scores. And then suddenly, there were a lot of Asian American students and Asian students who were getting in. And then suddenly there was a reverse proposition of, oh no, that's not what we meant. So the people who had written the law thought they were going to do something different and keep their privilege. And they weren't able to, because they realized that, you know, if they had this proposition and it did pass, that then it was going to change the so-called minority breakdown of students in the University of California system. So definitely, it's been very important. I know that there was just a ruling, I believe it was with Harvard, that kind of went the opposite direction, which is unfortunate. But yeah, it's up to us to be social justice leaders. And it might be that we as language educators are on the forefront of social justice just by the very fact, the very dint of what we do, which is bringing notions of cultural difference and the importance of accepting and understanding people in an intercultural, multicultural way. So we always already are leaders in social justice. All right. There are some resources, as I promised you, for each one of these. I have resources, and I'm going to go ahead and click on this one. This heading, Social Justice Readings and Resources, is actually a link to a chapter that I just finished. It hasn't been published yet, but I've actually given you the link to the longer version of it because I think it's actually the better version that I wrote with Ludmila Klimanova of the University of Arizona. And it's all about social justice and technology and world language education. So you should be able to get to this. If you can't and you need me to email it to you, I would be happy to. But in particular, the reason I've given it to you, and one of the things that our editors made us cut down, if you go way down to the bottom, there's like 7 pages of really, really, really good bibliography. And that's part of the reason why they made us keep cutting it back. They said you have too extensive of a bibliography, but I wanted you to have this full bibliography because it just has a lot of really, really super good information on social justice and computer-assisted language learning. So I wanted to share that with you. Again, it's a draft and it's not the form that's going to be published in the book, but I did want you to have that. And then out of that, I pulled some of what I think are the most important of those, some of the most important of those social justice readings and resources. And many of them are links, so you should be able to get to them. All right. Now, the second narrative is about COVID. And we already noticed that when we talked about COVID, that there was an issue of social justice and bias, if not outright discrimination, that came up, I know here in the United States, but also in throughout Europe and in many media resources. As instructional technologies emerge, routinely, people hail them as being tools that are going to promote equity and access and inclusivity to diverse learners. But the research shows over and over again that these tools are only marginally, just kind of successful with underrepresented and vulnerable student populations for many reasons. Indeed, when there was the emergency remote teaching, ERT, that came out with COVID-19 and our need to lock down and stay at home, it exposed the extent to which learning outcomes of minority students, whether it was because of the systematic and negative impact of race, gender, ethnicity, ableness, neurotypicality, age, economic status, or nationality, those things that had been present in the face-to-face classroom were magnified and made worse during the emergency remote teaching for certain groups of students. But it's not the technologies that are the problem. It's the underlying biases that we have as the humans behind the technologies and the systemic barriers that are found in the representations of learners, of their communities, the privileging of certain kinds of learning approaches and modalities that are not for minority learners, but are for the major group learners. It might be that there is limited access to appropriate and sufficient hardware, software, and broadband speed. There are problematic environmental conditions for students to be able to pay attention, to focus, and to stay on track. There were numerous instances where students were having to do their schoolwork through emergency remote teaching at home, but their home life did not allow them to. There were too many people. They didn't have a place where they could go and do their classrooms, or they had to take care of their siblings, their brothers and sisters. There were just many, many problems. And I found that even at the university level. It might also be that students no longer had access to the support of social and emotional learning that they needed in the classroom, in the physical classroom. They may not have had access to the tutoring, the scaffolding, and all of the support structures that there are in a physical classroom. And there was also, and we have to face up to it, especially I do as an English speaker, that there has been a problem with the monolingual or English problem. So much of computer-assisted language learning of the technologies runs through English and demands that students have a certain ability in English. And I know that there have been many ways of countering that, and China has been fabulous in devising systems that are not monolingual or US, European centered. But still, when it came to the pandemic, that quick turnaround made it hard for many learners to get the access that they needed. So there also have been problems, and we've already looked at that with disinformation. It happened very frequently that Zoom classrooms were attacked by trolls. So one would be giving their class, and suddenly somebody from heaven knows where would come in and do terrible things to disrupt classrooms. There were scammers who were trying to tell students and their families that they needed to buy this and that and the other thing. There were different kinds of bots going around that were causing problems, and just the internet in general. Even though it was helpful, it was also part of the problem. But again, one of the really good things about the COVID effect and the instructional technologies is that we were all forced to work with our students, with our learners, to gain in 21st century literacies, to learn how to use these tools that are part of everybody's life now, and that will only continue to be as, if not more important. So let's talk about it. So back again over in the chat, where did you need and or find the leadership that you needed during the COVID pandemic and that pivot to emergency remote teaching? Who did you go to? I know that I looked to ACTFL, the American Council on Teacher of Foreign Languages. Who did you go to? I went to friends. I have a lot of really techie friends like Yan Gao. And I went to my friends to find out how to do things. Where did you go? Where did you find leadership? I'm sorry if I embarrassed you, Jan, but it's true. You're one of my go-to people. I bet any number of you came here to this UVA program, didn't you? Yes, Chinese Language Association of Secondary Elementary Schools. Wonderful, Pei-Ying. Excellent. Where else did y'all go? Where did you find the really good stuff? Friends in Google. Yep. Learning Design and Technology team at UVA. Yeah, I very frequently went to the VCU technology group, the Center for Teaching Excellence, and the IT people at school. Beautiful. Chinese Language Teachers Association, colleagues at school. Wonderful. Yeah, there was a lot of sharing going on within schools. Even though we couldn't see each other, we were all helping each other out. Excellent, excellent. All righty. Well, keep on answering that question, but let's move on to the next one. And that is, how can you be a leader for the next big change? Because we had all of this social justice change, and we had all of this COVID and emergency remote teaching change. And there's going to be more change. So how do you think you can be a leader for the next change? What kinds of things can you offer? Can you put out there? What can you do to be a leader? I'm going to keep giving workshops. I like giving workshops. How can you be a leader? It might be in your school. It might be in your profession. It might be in your community. It might be in your family. And I wanted to zip back up because I saw a really great posting from Miao Fen, who noted that a faculty member mentioned to her that DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, is a very complicated issue. It really is. While promoting DEI, faculty are even more sensitive to and careful about what we say and how we interact with our fellow teachers. To some extent, this does create more distance among faculty because a person is trying not to say something that's offensive. I find in the English that I use, my daughter and I were talking about this just the other day, that there were two different phrases that I've used my whole life. And I just realized recently that they're highly racially insensitive. And in fact, my daughter, who's African-American, she said something about, well, they sold somebody down the river. And she and I looked at each other and went, oh, no, 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 because that has to do with slavery and enslaved peoples. And so she and I have both had to take this very familiar phrase and just get rid of it because it has a very undesirable history to it. So yeah, everyone's being careful now, and it's important to be careful, but it's also important to be forgiving and ask people what they meant, if they meant that way. So encouraging Chinese teachers to participate in UVA Start Talk program. Yes, definitely. Mentoring younger colleagues, mentoring colleagues, and looking at our students and talking to our diversity of students and saying, maybe you'd like to be a teacher of Chinese, or maybe you'd like to go on and do more work in what you're doing. Because you know, sometimes, and I look at some of the students that I've had, they weren't the best students, but they were the most passionate students. And they happen to be teachers now, and they got to be really, really good at the language. You know, they're really experts at the language now because they had the passion. So to identify those students and help them move forward is wonderful. Yeah, Li Ling, very definitely that we need to keep learning, keep open-minded, and keep sharing, always sharing with each other. Yeah. Okay. And Farong Hong, you went back to school to a master's degree in leadership education to get more knowledge, and then go to the school district leadership academy. Yeah, school districts have got leadership academies. Find out what expectations are in your own schools. And when the big change comes, then you exactly are going to be ready to know how to lead diverse groups, your school and in your county, in your school system, how to help move everybody forward. That's just beautiful, just beautiful. Okay, keep on writing in your answers, and I will try to make sure that I come back if I haven't seen everything here. I'll try to keep looking back. And here are some resources and readings on it. And mainly these are readings that I've found. So hopefully you might find something interesting that will help you. There are very recent works that are coming out on how people dealt with the most recent changes in things, like future-proofing language teaching, so how that's changed our profession. There's a lot of good work out there because we're all thinking about being change agents and being a part of the change rather than trying to resist to the change. All righty. So our last bit is to look at artificial intelligence. That's our third narrative that we've got. And it was I've known about work in artificial intelligence for many years, but I didn't think specifically how it was impacting and going to impact education and what we do as language teachers until specifically November of this past year. Let's take a look first at what AI is. It's a coder program that can learn not in the sense that we humans learn. There's a different kind of learning that's going on. It's recognizing patterns, and it's decision-making that's based on learned data. In other words, on these huge corpuses of information. Now, ChatGPT is a large language model, an LLM, that generates natural language text. So you can produce things like text completion, translations, summaries, unique assemblies of composite information. by simply asking a question and saying, hi, could you tell me what or could you list for me the 5 things that I should say to this workshop about what's really important in social justice and leadership, which I didn't do. I thought about it, but I didn't do it. But I should have, just so that I could have put it in here. So there's ChatGPT, which I think all of us have heard about. There's Bard, which is Google's response to ChatGPT. ChatGPT works in more languages than Bard. I believe Bard is still pretty monolingual, and it's English. Bing is the engine from Microsoft that is also using artificial intelligence algorithms, and includes conversations. And I think many of us, and I had to turn off my Alexa because otherwise she'd start talking to me right now, having heard her name. But Siri and Alexa are both virtual assistants that work orally and are based, you can ask just questions in regular language. It can be, whichever language you use, using natural language processing, and then you'll get a response back. Maybe good, may not be good, but it's getting better. And I just found out today, excuse me for my ignorance, that there is Ernie, which is Baidu's virtual assistant that is highly supported by the People's Republic of China. And I've put that into the resources so you can take a look at that. I'm sure you already know about it. But where it comes to artificial intelligence, we're thinking, wow, that's so 21st century. Well, actually, it goes all the way back to 1843 with Ada Lovelace and Charles Babbage. And it may go back further to other countries, and I didn't research that, and I probably should have. And then even in the 1940s and 50s, Alan Turing was working in notions of artificial intelligence. And I just wanted to note, because we're looking at things from a social justice lens, that both of these people, very much leaders in their field, they both suffered from social injustices. Ada Lovelace rarely gets talked about when it comes to computers and technology because she's a woman. And Alan Turing was actually imprisoned because he was homosexual. And a lot of the really important and good work that he was doing was stopped because the British government threw him into prison and then did some really awful things to him. But at any rate, ChatGPT came out November 30th, 2022 with version 3.0. But I had been using OpenAI for images to create them all the way since 2015. And nowadays, you can get to ChatGPT 3.0 and 3.5. They're both free, but ChatGPT 4.0 is fee-based. So already when we're talking about social justice and equity and accessibility, this is something which is going to eventually lead to more privilege for certain people. But I want to look at a little bit more deeply into the promises and challenges of artificial intelligence. Promises, it can help us create lesson plans. If it's Sunday night and you don't have your lesson plan ready, you can ask ChatGPT to help you out. It will even help you write a syllabus. It can help you create a test and give you the answers to the test. It can help you create level appropriate readings for your students. So you can say, these are students in Chinese 101, and we are doing a chapter on food, and I need a short little reading for them, and it will create it for you, a little composition. That's how it can help teachers. It can help our students because, oops, let me go back here. Sorry about that. It can help our students because they can get personal tutoring. They can go onto ChatGPT and they can say, I know my students do this all the time. They go, I don't understand the subjunctive. Could you explain me why I have to use the subjunctive after il faut que? And ChatGPT will say, well, here's why you have to use it. It might be that they need a review of some vocabulary or grammar or cultural way of doing things. The students may be looking to get reading or writing support, where the student could be doing a reading and say, ChatGPT, I don't understand what this means. What does it mean? Could you translate it for me? Now, they can also say, you've given them a prompt and they have to write about what my house looks like in Chinese, and it has to be 50 words at their 101 level. You can do that. We'll look at that under the challenges. But eventually we will also, and you can kind of do it with Siri and with Alexa, you can have little conversations with your virtual assistants. You can also get,
from laptrees.com.
whoops, she heard me.
Can also help with
Alexa, stop. Sorry, I have to stop saying, I thought I turned her off. So you can create copyright-free, tailored artwork. You can get programming, a little program that you need to run. Challenges are that AI draws input that may be outdated, compromised, and or biased. We have to be very careful about the data that's gone into creating these large language models. Sometimes there's a lack, there's some human oversight, but very little, and especially not down in the guts of the AI machine. Intercultural competency, maybe not so much. It is possible for our students, I was mentioning that they can cheat, and therefore the students don't learn anything because they didn't write the paragraph, ChatGPT did. And also it limits us and them to our own imagination, creativity, innovation. We need to be careful. We don't want to rely too much on the machines. Also, as I just mentioned, ChatGPT 4 is now paid, so it's fee-based. So questions of location, language, money, and privilege, those biases, those inequities are going to creep in, undoubtedly. There may be significant job loss. And there's going to continue to be significant, rapid, and widespread change. So, where do you see AI fitting into your teaching? Type it up in the chat area. Where do you see AI in your life? Did you know it can make slides for you? ChatGPT, you can ask it to make slides for you. It doesn't actually make the slides, and you have to run it through a different program, but there are all kinds of YouTube videos that will show you really quickly how to use ChatGPT to make the slides that you need to teach clothing and, I don't know, present tense verbs. Where do you see AI? Yeah, Dolly, it really is. It's a double-edged sword, very much. We have to, I think we have to use it, but we also have to be very careful about it. Yeah, it can help us. It can hurt us. It can help our students, but it can hurt our students. Yeah, that sword's cutting both ways. Okay, Michelle, you're trying to figure out how to create assignments for your students where they use ChatGPT or Ernie to do some work and analyze their language use. Yeah, so this is a great place where having a discussion with some of the folks here at the Start Talk program about how you're going to frame the assignments like this. And I know I've been seeing quite a few different YouTube videos, and there are language and just education people who are coming up with a lot of templates for how to use ChatGPT for exactly this kind of thing. So Jan is saying, It could create a worksheet. Yeah, definitely create worksheets. And you could ask it, what are some issues in social justice that I should bring to my Chinese 2 class? How teachers can do research, get slides, ideas, write quick responses. Now, ChatGPT to practice speaking, it's coming, but right now it's text-based, but Alexa, we already know she's listening, so I can't use her name again, or Siri, any of the voice over those kind of voice programs can allow you to do some practice speaking. Okay, now Fen, you're not going to jump into it until there are professional and well-tested guidelines that are released, definitely. Well, we're getting close to the end of time. I'm going to leave these other 2 questions for where do you feel there needs to be leadership. And Miao Fen, I think you really said that, to get professional and well-tested guidelines for using AI in teaching Chinese and other languages. I think we need some direction, and especially, and you'll see this in the resources, that a number of the people who have been in the forefront of creating the AI that we have right now are saying, wait a minute, this is potentially a huge problem threatening humanity. We need to step back. We need to think. We need to come up with policy. We need to make sure that there are brakes, like car brakes. So also the question, what leadership role you might assume that you might take on for AI and teaching Chinese, and what level would you be comfortable doing that? Your own classroom, on your campus, in the profession more widely, in the community. Yeah, so let's see. Miao Fen is also saying that UVA had a kickoff talk on ChatGPT in the fall, and you're leading a focus group on a monthly basis, which is excellent. Now, Miao Fen, is that for everybody at UVA, or is that specifically for languages? Wonderful, wonderful. I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah. Let's see. Okay, Dan, I'm going to go quickly and see what you've sent to us. And don't worry, it always says you can't get to something here. I have some kind of
I'm sorry. This is for the teachers who are interested to get the certificate of attendance.
Oh, all righty, yeah. Very good. Let me get back over here to the presentation. So y'all have your form that you can go to. And I wanted to share with you some of the readings, and many of these are videos. So PBS has from 2019, before all this big ChatGPT came out, how AI technology is disrupting the traditional classroom. There was a Hessinger report in 2019, and specifically to what we've been talking about today, this report shows where there is bias and social injustice built into AI. So as socially just teachers, we need to look at this and recognize where, by using AI, we can bring bias into our classrooms that we do not want to, that we can be doing things that are not accessible, inclusive, diverse, and so on. NPR has I believe this was either this morning or yesterday morning, where the leading experts are talking about the risk of extinction for the human race from AI. The NSF, this Dear Colleague letter, actually is not just a letter. It's telling us we need to be careful, but it's also looking for people who want to do a grant and get money to look for how to deal with AI in education and elsewhere in the world. So I don't know how appropriate it is to us in languages, but I'm sure that somewhere there it is. The government of the UK has AI regulations already. I found this from the European Union, which is a digital bite on artificial intelligence, which also is from this year. And then I found out, and I'm very sorry, this source is not a Chinese source about ERNIE. And many of the things that I found as I was looking were very biased about China's use of AI. And I could tell that it was coming from a slant that was not at all equitable. And even the Al Jazeera report that I looked at was not very open to, not very even and just. So I would like to learn a lot more about ERNIE and how the Chinese government is working very hard to come up with policy, but also to make sure that people have access to ERNIE and that it's used in ways that are good for the Chinese people in general. So, do you have any more questions or comments, anything that you would like to bring up that we have not already addressed here, places that you would like to go with this?